Welcome, everyone. We are going to get started in a couple minutes. We're going to allow folks to log on. So if folks can just be patient for a quick minute, we'll get started probably about 2 or 5 minutes after.
Also, just some housekeeping. We will be using the chat function if you're joining by computer. So if you have a question, you can type it in the chat at any time, and we will get to them. The hosts and panelists here will be able to see your questions, and we'll answer them live here when we get to the Q&A portion.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. We're going to get started here in just a minute. And we are recording this, so we can share this on the Nebraska Easement website, as well as on the Pipeline Fighters website. So landowners that couldn't be with us tonight can still view this presentation. So we'll get started in just 1 more minute. We'll give folks 1 more minute to log on. Okay, so hi, everybody. My name is Jane Kleb. I run a group called Bold, Nebraska. A lot of folks in our state know Bold from the work that we did with farmers, ranchers, advocates, as well as tribal nations to stop the Keystone XL pipeline. And we were firmly against that pipeline because they were using eminent domain for private gain. And it was an export pipeline. It wasn't something that was going to help American energy independence. It was foreign oil, wasn't going to do anything to decrease our gas prices. In fact, it would have raised the gas prices in the Midwest because it would have diverted oil down to the export market. So Bold really has a track record over the past now 12 years of working with local communities to protect their property rights. And we do that in a lot of different ways. We do a lot of actions that really prove our, belief that a small group of citizens are much more powerful than big corporations. And we do that not only through legal actions, which Brian Jorde with the Domina Law Group is going to talk with you in a minute about, on how the Nebraska Easement Action Team, which is the legal landowner co-op, can help protect your property rights with these pipelines. But Bold does lots of other activities in order to kind of create a very unlikely alliance of citizens to not only protect property rights and water, but to really show that our energy uses, our land uses, should be in the hands of citizens. So I'm going to give a brief overview of carbon pipelines, knowing that many of you may already know this information, but we think it's really important that we're constantly doing, that we're educating each other, that we're starting everybody off kind of on the same page of information. And then I'm going to pass this over to Brian Jorde, and then we're going to have plenty of time for questions and answers. So first, what we're here talking about today are these carbon pipelines that are being proposed across Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, and Illinois. And we're also talking about a carbon pipeline that would be converted from fracked gas to carbon that would go through Nebraska, Colorado, and up to Wyoming. So on your screen, you'll see this kind of spaghetti lines of carbon pipelines. One is the proposed Summit Carbon Solutions, and one is the proposed Navigator. The other third pipeline, the conversion of a fracked gas to a carbon pipeline, is not on this particular map. It's in the southern portion of Nebraska and then goes up to Colorado and Wyoming. This is a very new concept for the United States. We have roughly 5,000 miles of carbon pipelines in the United States only, and the carbon pipeline companies are proposing that they can build up to 60,000 miles of pipelines. This isn't going to serve our energy needs. It's not going to bring gas prices down. The only thing that these carbon pipelines will do is capture carbon in ethanol plants and then pump that at very high pressure into North Dakota or Wyoming and make these two pipeline companies a lot of money, anywhere from $400 to $600 million a year. When you hear Summit and Navigator talking, or if you're looking at their TV ads, their newspaper ads, or listening to their radio ads, you would think that this is all some magical solution, and this is just going to bring all sorts of dollars into local folks' pockets. And it couldn't be further from the truth. Carbon pipelines are a very risky proposition. And that's not just us as advocates who want to protect people's property rights saying that. PHMSA, which is the federal government that regulates all pipelines, oil, gas, and now carbon, has now admitted that they don't have the proper regulations in place, that states don't have the proper regulations in place, and they're going through a rulemaking process at the moment. When a carbon pipeline explodes, it can literally kill you. So when Summit or Navigator are on stage and they're talking about how the content of these pipelines is no different than us drinking bubbly water, that is absolutely a misleading and untrue statement. We saw when a carbon pipeline exploded in the United States and Mississippi, people became essentially, they seemed like they were intoxicated. Some of them were passing out. First responders could not get to them because their engines weren't working. And when Summit and Navigator pipeline companies are telling landowners or county commissioners, if an explosion did happen, it would not be a problem because the carbon would then just dissipate into the air, that's also just scientifically not true. This gas is very thick and dense, and it would go to the ground, and it could potentially spread out for a very wide amount of space. We don't know how long. I wish I could sit here tonight and tell you, just like we can for fracked gas pipelines, what the danger zone is when a fracked gas pipeline explodes and the fire that could cause. Neither one of these companies have made public, and from what we know, they haven't even done them yet, what's called a dispersion model. So when a carbon pipeline explodes, what is going to be the danger zone of the gas and how long will it travel, because this carbon in the pipeline is pumped at such high pressure. So that's one of the big concerns that we have with these carbon pipelines. The other thing that is important to note is that PHMSA, the federal agency that regulates pipelines, did issue a memo and a report on the carbon pipeline explosion in Mississippi. They made it very clear that new rules are forthcoming. They encourage states and county commissions to create their own local ordinances to make sure that these pipelines are being regulated at the state and county level. And despite what Summit and Navigator may tell your county commissioners or may tell our state senators, we absolutely have the legal right to put in laws, things like setbacks from homes, because right now these pipelines are being proposed as close to 50 feet and 200 feet from somebody's home or from somebody's main feedlot with all of their cattle. We can require things like a very stringent emergency response plan. We can require pipeline companies to have a decommissioning plan in place, which means if this pipeline is a 25-year of service, even though they want a lifetime easement, which Brian's going to talk about in a minute, that they would be required to dig up that pipe and dispose of it properly and then restore the land. That's what a decommissioning plan would be, or give landowners the choice to keep the pipeline in their ground and get an additional payment. We have none of those laws in the state of Nebraska. In fact, if you're following the Summit and Navigator pipelines, especially in Iowa or in South Dakota, you'll see a lot of news stories about public hearings and a government process at their utility boards. they have state laws that require a carbon pipeline or an oil pipeline to go in front of their utility commissions. In Nebraska, we do not have such law. We fought for several years and won to get the Public Service Commission to govern and to do pipeline routing for oil pipelines. But the Public Service Commission has said that that law does not apply to carbon pipelines. So in Nebraska, we have 0 state agencies that are reviewing a route and giving landowners due process. That is very critical for the use of eminent domain, which Brian's going to talk about more in a second. It's important to know that these pipeline companies follow a very familiar playbook, whether they're pushing an oil pipeline, a gas pipeline, or a carbon pipeline. They will tell you things like, you're the only person left in your area that hasn't signed. Everybody is signing up. If you sign today, you'll get a signing bonus. If you don't sign today, we're going to take your land by eminent domain. Or they'll say things like, if you don't sign today, the price is just going to keep on going down and down and down. All of that is just high pressure harassing techniques that they use in order to pressure you to sign. Especially in the state of Nebraska, there is no rush for you to sign any easement that these pipeline companies are putting in front of you because they have no way to get a routing permit in our state. The best thing to do is to sign up for the Nebraska Easement Action Team. So you're part of a team of landowners with legal assistance from Brian Jorde and the Domina Law Group. So your property rights are protected. And so you can tell these pipeline companies, stop coming to my dad's nursing home, trying to get him to sign without any other families present. Stop calling me, stop knocking on my doors. I am now represented by a lawyer. They're also misleading tribal nations' perspectives on these pipelines. The 4 tribal nations in the state of Nebraska just recently voted to do a formal opposition resolution opposing these pipelines. But if you listen to Summit and Navigator, they'll tell you that they are all on board with supporting these pipelines. And then lastly, these are permanent easements. This is not like a wind turbine that's a 25-year easement and landowners get paid on a yearly basis. This is a one-time payment for a lifetime easement that they can then convert into other products. And so you may ask yourself, why in the heck are these pipelines all of a sudden being proposed? Well, the answer is simple. It's money. There is something called the 45Q tax credit that has been around now for several years. George Bush, Obama, and Trump have all issued in their budgets the 45Q tax credit. The difference this time around is that the money is now so lucrative. Everybody's trying to figure out at the national level how we solve climate change. And the 45Q tax credit is the oil and gas industry's solution to how they are going to pretend to solve climate change. So what they're doing is they're taking carbon from ethanol plants, and again, under very high pressure, up to 2100 to 2600 PSI, it turns into a liquid form as they pump that through your land, through our water, and supposedly magically going to be able to put it safely into the ground forever. That's when they get the 45Q tax credit, which again could be anywhere from $400 to $600 million a year. These tax credits have to get renewed every 2 years. And so that is something that national organizations, as well as groups like BOLD, are fighting at the federal level to really encourage our elected officials to not give these big tax credits to oil and gas corporations so they can line their pockets while pretending to do something on climate change. So our main goal is to organize farmers, ranchers, and landowners into a legal co-op with the Nebraska Easement Action Team in order to protect the land. When we fight pipelines, that is our primary goal. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian, and in the Q&A, I'm be happy to answer any other logistical questions or kind of big picture questions that you may have about carbon pipelines.
All right, excellent. Mark, if you might allow me to share screen, if I could, I will show everyone some slides, and folks will walk through some information. I know you probably have lots of questions, and so we want to leave time for questions. So I will go ahead and get started here. All right, let's see. Okay, and Okay, so like Jane said, I'm Brian Jorde, lawyer based in Omaha here with the Domina Law Group, and we've had the pleasure to represent hundreds and hundreds of landowners around the country, and most notably right here in Nebraska. And in fact, some of the people that we started working with back in 2009 and 10 are unfortunately confronted with one of these two potential CO2 pipelines we're talking about primarily tonight, the Navigator or the Summit pipeline. And we first started working on these issues along with Jane, Mark, and their team, and the landowner easement team on the Keystone XL pipeline. And so this model, this process, wading through the confusion, answering the questions, and developing a path and a plan for all of you, and then having meetings like this on a routine basis where we can keep anyone who joins up with us informed, is nothing new. This is a model we created and started and has been rolled out all around the country. So the Nebraska Easement Action Team is a landowner rights organization. It was formed by Nebraska landowners for Nebraska landowners, and as Jane said, with the focus on stopping eminent domain for private gain, protecting property rights to the full extent possible, and educating landowners and empowering them to let them know, hey, there are actions you can take. This is not hopeless. Is this an uphill battle? Of course it is, primarily because the legislature in your state, the elected representatives have frankly failed you. And these pipeline companies have kind of greased the skids, so to speak, have gotten laws in place in some instances that are very helpful, or have avoided getting a regime or a set of laws or standards that protect you. And so part of what we do is help wade through the kind of the morass, the confusion of all of that. And the idea of the easement team is, let's all come together under one umbrella. Let's work together. Let's share information. It's better if we know what's going on in all corners of the state, as opposed to any of you having your local lawyer or attorney, no matter how amazing and wonderful they are, and only knowing your little piece of what's going on. And so not only are we advocating and allowing folks to join in this coalition, this landowner co-op, we are rolling out and have this model in full force in North Dakota, South Dakota, and Iowa, and we're looking at Minnesota and obviously Nebraska. So the main states were for the main pipeline routes of both Summit and Navigator. We are working with landowners and other legal experts, potential witnesses, organizers specifying specific actions, specializing in each state, and it's pretty exciting. So the whole idea is you don't build the army after the invasion. It's let's get together now and quick. You can kick the tires and wonder and hope and kind of think, well, maybe it'll be okay. And then at the last minute, oh, I need help. Or you can say, hey, this looks like this is coming. They say they want to take something from me, which is mine, that's important to me. I need to get involved. And that's exactly what we're talking about tonight. So folks here that you can see on the screen, these are people just like you, clients of ours and NEAT members, NEAT landowners from way back in early 2010, all the way through to the actually about a month ago in 2022, when the final Trans-Canada reverse of the easements that they took were rescinded, reversed, and removed from our landowners' land. And so people just like you have gone through this. Yes, it's frustrating, but there is light at the end of the tunnel if you take the steps and use the tools right before you, which we're talking about this evening. So you're probably very familiar with the map and the routes here, crisscrossing, no real rhyme or reason, many points of intersection of these pipelines over or under. And unfortunately, some landowners in Nebraska, Minnesota, Iowa have both, if you can imagine that, crisscrossing their property, potentially. Summit extends primarily there from Iowa, Nebraska, then heading, as James said, to the terminal point in North Dakota, where they allegedly are going to dump this somewhere into the earth and hope it stays there and hope that everything's okay. Although they've never built an inch of pipeline, never managed an inch of pipeline, never maintained an inch of pipeline. But anyway, just why don't we let them go ahead and figure it out, and hopefully there's not a disaster. So what do they want? They want to control your property in certain ways and prevent you from doing things. They want to do it their way with little input from you, even though they'll claim and they'll act like, oh yeah, we want to hear from you. But in the end, it's all about their profits, limiting their risks, which means putting more risks on you. They're not going to pay property taxes on the real property where the pipeline lays. So you still own the land, which you might think, oh, well, that's good. But it's actually arguably could be worse, because then you still have the liability and the taxes and the risk, and try to get insurance to potentially cover you for a catastrophic occurrence. And they get to limit their risk because they don't take full ownership of the land, but they get to use it as if they are an owner or a part owner. They can sell and transfer their easement to anyone, anywhere, any company, any country in the world, and you can't do anything about it. So how to protect yourself: education, like we're doing here, the resources like the NebraskaEasement.org website, the BOLD website, and continuing to work and share information. A little primer on eminent domain, because people are always like, well, first, just before we even talk about anything, how is this even possible? How can a company that's purely for profit, funded by rich billionaire oil guys or hedge funds from New York or BlackRock or South Korea is invested, how can they come to Nebraska, the Midwest, and just take our land? Well, they shouldn't be able to if we followed the Constitution and the Fifth Amendment of the US Constitution, which says private property shouldn't be taken, or can't be, for public use without just compensation. And so the very premise is you can't even begin to even think about trying to take my land unless it's what? For public use. And if we cross the public use hurdle, then you have to pay fairly for all the inconvenience, all the value of the taking, what you're preventing me from doing, and so on. But this kind of gets watered down over the years, and that can happen through court cases where the judges make decisions, and it can happen most directly on a state-by-state individual basis by having the lobbyists of these major corporations come in, and you don't even know what's going on. You're busy farming, going about your daily life, and they are setting the groundwork in motion so that they can get the best laws for them. Our Constitution here in Nebraska mirrors the federal public use. But again, if they can get our legislature, our unicameral, to pass laws that are favorable, then we have to do the hard work to try to claw back that erosion of rights that's taken place. So what's an easement? Well, it's a portion of your property that you own, that you have the deed to, that you're responsible for the taxes, you're responsible for insurance, liability, and problems, and you're unwilling to sell it, right? Most of you weren't looking around hoping someone could put a 50-foot permanent easement forever and ever across your property, affecting you and all generations to come. You weren't looking to be potentially subjected to an amount of liability or claims against you should there be any damage. And then it's a he said, she said, finger pointing of, well, maybe you were the cause. Well, no, it was a bad weld. Well, didn't you drive a combine across it? Well, yeah, I'm farming. Well, maybe that did it. You don't want to be a part of that, okay? And so they will get the at-will access and use, and they only pay you once, okay? Only once and forever, and we think that's unfair. Landowner rights include surface rights, of course, to occupy, to walk around your land, the vegetation right, planting trees and crops to improve, build buildings, build any type of improvements. You have mineral rights, so rights then below the surface. You have air rights. You can put up a 40-foot flag if you want to. You can prevent people from flying low over your property. And importantly, you have the right to be free from public nuisance or private nuisances or interferences, pollution, excessive noise, odors, those kind of things that disturb us that are coming from elsewhere and affecting us, our quiet enjoyment of our land. But those, all of them, some of them, or all of them, or some of them partially, can be taken away through condemnation, through eminent domain, and by taking and putting an easement on your ground. And that's exactly what these companies want to do to you. They will tell you, don't worry, we'll take care of all the damages in case of a rupture, spill, or leak. After all, it's our pipeline. Yeah, of course. And the people telling you that are the, if we break this down into like, you know, an assembly line, first it's the nice, typically the nice, smiley, cheery, oh, hey, how are you doing? Just really good to meet you. And this is a great project. The salespeople, right? And the salespeople don't know anything about anything when it comes to liability. They're always making all the promises like a salesperson, and then they have to call and say, hey, can we back this up? And then it's usually, oh, well, that wasn't quite right. Okay. That's what some of you are probably dealing with right now. And like most Midwesterners, you would have a conversation like this. They would tell you a statement like that's on the screen here. You'd call me up and you'd say, oh, no, there's not a problem because they told me that it would be okay. Now stop. I think it's great that us in the Midwest, and I'm a lifelong Midwesterner, are trusting first. That's great. That's a great quality. But you can't be that way when it comes to these companies, because if it's just, you know, spoken, it means nothing. And good luck chasing them down after the fact and trying to actually make good on these oral promises. They're worthless, completely worthless. I want to talk about a few stories to highlight how dangerous easements are. This is an actual story that you can Google out of Auburn, Nebraska, a handful of years ago, where a son of a farmer was doing work on the field, removing a hedgerow with a bulldozer. Lawful activity, perfectly fine, improving their land that they paid their hard-earned money for, and he hit a buried pipeline. But the thing is, there were no signs, there were no warnings. They didn't own the property when it went in who knows how many years ago. And this is you in the future. This is your grandson or granddaughter in the future, okay? When this is long gone, and if this goes in, people forget about it. Well, what happens? The act of the ordinary course of farming, preparing the land, etc., caused a 6,000 barrel or a 252,000 gallon spill in 2 pipelines. So what do you suppose happens? Pipeline company has to shut it down. They're investigating. They're wondering what's going on. Well, we probably had a sign there, so landowner, it's probably your fault. Maybe it's not. The agent for the pipeline company, again, is interviewed on TV. Well, we're not sure, you know, the sales kind of, yeah, we're not sure. Maybe it'll be okay. I don't know if the landowner will have any liability. Well, what do you suppose the pipeline company, who told prior owner, don't worry, this will never be a problem because after all, it's our pipeline, it's our fuel. They sue this family for approximately $5 million in federal court in Nebraska, and it would have bankrupted them, wiped them completely out. And it was a hard fought suit, and we represented these folks. It's a real problem. That's one example right here in Nebraska. Here's a photo out of the kitchen window of a former client of mine down in Texas. Now, we got involved with them after this process had all happened, so too late to try to stop it, unfortunately. But this is what will be happening to you. Do you want to be looking at this in your field, out your front window? Do you want to see the lowest price contractors that are, you know, the cheapest, the quickest, the down and dirty, just dig this trench? Do you see any particular efforts to screen topsoil here or keep anything in any semblance of a neat and orderly way? Of course not, because they're the cheapest people that get the winning bids for the pipeline companies that don't even build pipelines, right? You don't want this in your front yard. You don't want this activity happening on your field or for your family. But it did, unfortunately. So this work's going on, and now unintended consequences, thing you wouldn't even think about, right? This is all obvious here. But what about this? Can we see the crack, that there's a crack in the foundation? And then the advice was, well, just, you know, go to the hardware store and get some of that great stuff and fill it. Like that'll fix it, landowner. Okay, this was just the beginning of the problems. We find out a sewer line was severed. They buried it back up to try to hide it from the landowners. They're gone. They come back from a little vacation. The house doesn't smell right. Mold starts to starts to fill the home. They're all getting sick, going to the hospital. And long story short, the entire house, their family home that was passed down to them from the grandfather of the dad, had to be torn down. Had to be torn down. And why? Because of the negligence, the quick, the down and dirty, the cheap subcontractor of the contractor of who knows who it was out there being negligent and causing real problems. Here's a last example. This is an example of someone who emailed me a long time ago, back in 2014, and recounts the story of the promise that, don't worry, if we damage your crops, either during construction or when we have to come and maintain it, or when there's a problem and we come to clean it up or look at it, investigate it, we'll pay you. You betcha, we'll pay $8 a bushel at whatever yield. You just let us know. Long story short, person didn't get it in writing. After the fact, oh, Bob doesn't work here anymore. Who told you that? We don't have that record anywhere. No, you're going to have to prove it. Give us your last 5 records. No, we think that's too high. We'll give you this, not entering calls, and you get pennies on the dollar. That's what happens when you trust pipeline companies, okay? You can't do it. So briefly on the easement. What is an easement? Would any of you sign your name to a document that gives property rights away forever and could potentially lead and handcuff you to the conditions and the problems we've discussed if you don't even understand every single line in that easement? You shouldn't. It's crazy, but people do it all the time because why? They think they have no other option, which is so frustrating for Jane and I and all of our team and landowners that are with us to hear, because it's an honest mistake. Well, we thought, I mean, they just said they were going to come anyway and it's hopeless, so I just signed it. And it's just like, oh my gosh, do you have any idea what you just did? So we don't even know anything about, for instance, Summit Carbon Solutions LLC. Who really are they? What are their assets? What if there was a problem? Do they have the assets to pay for a catastrophic event if it's very expensive? Is this a company designed for bankruptcy? And it's too bad, so sad, Nebraska and Midwestern landowners? We have no idea who it is. Why is the easement assignable at their will without us being able to have any say? Why is it perpetual when I have 50, but actually these tax credits, the sole purpose of building this, it has nothing to do with climate change, it's just the money grab. Oh, they're only on the books for 12 years. They're approved for 12 years, yet they want to take an easement from you and leave this pipeline in the ground rotting under your fields, your homes, etc., forever, even though it's only a 12-year life. And like Jane said, they could just abandon it in place and leave it there. Why? There needs to be better protections. I talked a little bit about the liability. You saw those 3 examples of not getting things in writing or not understanding or trusting them. And what about future property values? If I, third party, can come and buy your neighbor's ground that's up for auction and yours has the pipeline, theirs doesn't, well, what would you be more likely to buy, all things considered, right? And so it can affect you in ways for long times to come. And, why not a lease, or why not minimize the term? So there's all sorts of problems in the easement. And part of NEAT, you might understand, Nebraska Easement Team, is if and when we get to the point where we have to negotiate, we try other actions, we try to get new and better laws passed, which we're working on. We're working with the counties to have better protections for you. We do all those things, all of us collectively brainstorming, working together. If we get to the point where it's like, it's time to negotiate, do you think you'll get a better deal negotiating by yourself in secret, not knowing anything else of what they're telling people all over the state and all over the Midwest, which I know, which we know because of our networks? Or do you think you'll be better if you're in this group that's sharing information, talking about best practices, keeping people up to speed, fighting as a negotiating block if we get to that point, as opposed to one-off? What we have found, and maybe this is lightning strikes and this is the first one that's ever different, but we have found is by first focusing on the landowner protections and everything other than talking about signing the easement, it's actually the best path to negotiating a better deal if you have to in the future, okay? So there's a method to the madness in our process and our strategies, and it's worked very well for the folks that have joined up under this model in other states. So in summary, why NEAT? We will deal with the future communication. So if you sign up with NEAT, that's the landowner group. And then the second step is getting into the legal group, which is signing directly up with our law firm. And the combination of those two allows you to be able to say, hey, I'm part of NEAT. I have legal counsel as well. Talk to them. So if you don't want the annoying or harassing calls or emails or just say, I thought I'd pop by and see how you're doing, all of that nonsense, they can't do that anymore. So a lot of people see that as a benefit right out of the gate. As we've discussed, we compile the best information from everyone. There's no secret deals or special deals or wink, wink. Everyone's treated fairly, openly, honestly, transparently as we share information, communicating the best tips and their latest tricks. Legal actions, we'll take legal actions in court as necessary, as reasonable, and in conjunction with discussions with all of you, because after all, it's your case. I mean, it's your process, and to defend your property rights. And then if and when it's the time, it's like, okay, yep, we may not like it, but it's time to negotiate. We'll get in there and we'll do all the fine print collectively for all, and you share in that. And then your price portion, since that's so property specific, we can help you with that on an individual basis. So that's the model. We didn't hatch this yesterday. It's been in motion and successful for over a decade now in multiple states around the country. We're excited to be able to offer it to you, but it only works if people get involved. If you're kind of on the sidelines, well, I'll see, what happens or how it goes, and no one's quite doing it. Well, then there's nothing for us to do. We can go on and do other things. So you need to tell us, hey, this makes sense. We want you, and then let's get busy and move forward and really work on this. So in Iowa, we've got well over 200 folks. In South Dakota, I just filed party status in a process there to oppose the Summit pipeline for over 230 folks. And we're gaining and working on our Nebraska membership as we speak. So with that, I'll throw it back to Mark and Jane, and any questions at all you'd like to ask, please do.
Thanks, Brian. And just a reminder, you can put questions in the chat. There was a couple texted to one of our organizers, Shelly Meyer. We have two organizers that work with the Nebraska Easement Action Team, Shelly and Tom Janung. You might have met them at some of the meetings that we've been holding in person across the state. So landowners were asking them. So I'll ask these three questions, Brian, and then if folks have other questions, please put them in the chat and we'll get them answered as well. Can you please describe the claim that Summit and Navigator are doing, especially at county commission meetings, that they're going to be paying these millions in dollars of property taxes?
So interesting story just yesterday. And again, the benefit of having the network of all the states in South Dakota, they were making this claim to a county board of what we're going to pay $70 million in taxes. And the county's like, oh, really? Why don't I call our Department of Revenue and I'll give them the figures that you said and we'll have them do the calculations. It was 1/10 of what they were claiming. And so I don't know where they're getting their numbers. I don't know the asterisks and the fine print that back it up, that they're not telling you, hoping you just listen to the headline and move on. But they don't pay real property taxes on an easement. If they buy a small piece of ground to put a pumping valve station, et cetera, on it, okay, yeah, they own that little piece, they pay property tax. They will pay, or they're supposed to pay, personal property tax on the pipe, but that's depreciable. If you have a business, you can buy an asset, depreciate it out. And so that can be as on a short of a 7-year depreciation schedule, and then poof, those taxes are gone. And so it's really unfair, and it's more smoke and mirrors, and I wouldn't trust the numbers.
Thanks, Brian. The other question is, how is joining NEAT in the legal representation that the Domina Law Group has better than perhaps using a family lawyer or kind of a family trust lawyer?
Well, sure. I mean, it's a fair question. I mean, if I, needed to have heart surgery, I wouldn't go to my orthopedic surgeon. I'd go to my heart surgeon. And my orthopedic surgeon, my general doctor, may love them. They may be great, but they're not specialists in this area. And it's that simple. You know, I'm not going to talk down a family lawyer, the person that did your trust or LLC. They may be excellent and they may even be able to help you on this. It's just going to be difficult for any of you to find, again, not just me. I'm kind of the face here, but there's a gigantic team behind me, a team behind Jane and Mark. It's impossible to recreate that. And if you did, it would cost you millions of dollars to try to do it. So it's the combination of we've been there, we've done that. The questions you're not going to ask us a question, I would bet, that's like, oh, wow, I've never heard that. You know, it's, yep, everyone asks that. And then, of course, if we're segueing into the economics, the model is very simple. Whether there's one landowner or 1 million, I don't get paid any more, okay? NEAT doesn't charge any more money. We do the work and we divide it across a large amount of people. So if you go individually to your lawyer, they're going to charge you however many hundreds of dollars an hour and you'll pay the full freight. You come with us, you are a fraction divided by all, and the costs spread out amongst all of you. And so it ends up being, I mean, pennies on the dollar when you break it down. And so that's why this model has been so popular across the country.
Thanks, Brian. One of the things that comes up a lot is how do pipelines have eminent domain authority in our state, but for example, wind and solar don't use eminent domain and they're building energy. So what happened with our state law to make oil, gas, potentially carbon pipelines have eminent domain and not other forms of energy?
Yep, great question. And it's the frustrating one, right? It's who's been around longer? Well, oil and gas companies. Who's more entrenched in our state? Who has more money, more lobbyists, more powers, more slaps on the back and paid for dinners and drinks, etc. That's the big picture answer. But in our state, our now U.S. Senator Deb Fischer didn't do anyone any favors back in 2006 when she had a chance to protect landowners, but instead gave a carve out, gave a giveaway to oil and gas hydrocarbon companies only, and not wind, not solar, not biomass, not any green, clean energy. We don't want that. We just want the big oil companies, dirty oil companies, et cetera, to be able to take your land. Those other people, they don't get to take it, even though they're producing arguably a much cleaner and more sustainable form of energy. And so it's a completely uneven balance and playing field, because if you can influence enough of our legislators around Nebraska, get whatever law you want. And so part of this group, again, is trying to make you more powerful as a group, as a collective, than you possibly could be. And there's legislative efforts from Jane's side of things that tie into an overall strategy that we lay out. And so there's a lot going on to try to fight for better protections for you in lots of different areas.
One of the issues that's come up is surveys. A lot of landowners obviously are reading articles that are happening in Iowa in particular, where Iowa has a law about surveyors, and the state law there requires landowners to let land surveyors of pipeline companies on their land. But what happens in Nebraska? Can landowners essentially tell Summit and Navigator land surveyors when they come, no, I don't want you on my land?
Okay, great question. And it's, you know, for a lawyer, I'm always asked the question, well, is that legal? Can they do that? And the answer often is, it depends on how you interpret the law. You know, the law, there's a lot of gray, like what's a reasonable person? What's a reasonable amount of time? That's a debate, right? And that's why, in order to improve bad laws, we sometimes have to file lawsuits. But if you want to look this up, Nebraska revised statute, if you Google Neb Rev Stat 76-702, that is the statute, which is, you know, the law made by the legislature that says a condemner. So an entity that has condemnation powers may enter upon the land of another, after negotiations have failed and after informing you that they're doing it, but for a limited purpose of examining and surveying the land, not for destructive surveys, not for whole borings that they want to do up in South Dakota 10-foot wide trenches and they're going, 20 feet deep. I have no idea what they're doing there, but that's under, again, remember the condemnation statutes, which means those would only apply if what? If a CO2 pipeline has condemnation rights. And nowhere in our condemnation laws does it say carbon dioxide, which means we are potentially going to have a battle on the very threshold issue. And so they'll just show you, well, see right here, we have the right to come on here, and they'll probably copy and paste that, put it in a letter to you. But it's like, whoa, let's start at the beginning. Who says you have any condemnation rights that you just walk into Nebraska and you have? Who says that? That's where fight number one is, okay? And so the answer to the question, well, can they just come on my land? If you let them, anyone can come, anyone can do anything. If you let them, we're like, oh yeah, I guess so. Sure, come on. If you say no, you don't have the legal right. I have not seen anything where it says carbon dioxide companies have condemnation rights. And so therefore you don't come. And if you come, I'm calling the sheriff. I'm going to file a report against you and for trespassing. And so in Iowa, we are having gigantic fights over this issue, very contested, very serious allegations of harassment by Summit Navigator in South Dakota. It's getting real, frankly, a little dangerous with people getting heated, and there the law also is bad and vague. And so can they enter? I don't think so. They're going to say they can. I have a different interpretation, and we're going to have to probably fight it out. So, I would encourage people to resist, not, with physical force, but resist. That's typically been working in Iowa, and they leave and grumble and rumble and then send me nasty emails and then, try to do it again. So you just have to stand up for yourself.
And when we have in-person meetings, we have no trespassing signs that then says no surveys, no eminent domain, no carbon pipelines that we've been handing out in multiple states. So we'll do another round of in-person meetings, which we'll post on nebraskaeasement.org. So if you don't have one of those signs yet, you can get one at the meetings that we hold in July. You can also just put up your own no trespassing sign as well. We do know on this particular point that Navigator is now offering at least $1,000 to landowners to let them do a survey. And they'll say things like, this doesn't commit you to the easement. We just want to get a lay of your land and see where maybe some risky spots are. But when you allow them to do that, you're one, opening up the door to negotiations. That's one of the big reasons they do land surveys to begin with, is to create a relationship with landowners and to make it easier for them then to put an easement contract in front of you because they now have a relationship with you. So that's really the main reason they do the surveys. But in particular, if you sign a contract with them that you're going to get money, you then have to give them information, things like your social security number, which they will then use to determine what your worth is, how much loans you have, so they can essentially lowball any offer that they put in front of you, knowing what debt you may be carrying. So we strongly encourage folks not to sign anything with them, to say no to surveys, and to obviously sign neat. So then you can just say, you're not allowed on my property, talk to my lawyer. Mark, did you want to give the phone information for folks that are on the phone if they want to ask a question?
Yes. Hey, everyone. This is Mark. I think I'm the Communications and Digital Director for Bold and Neat and all of the various orgs we got going here. If you have a question and you're on the phone, you can text it to 402-302-2611. Say it a couple times. It's 402-302-2611, 402-302-2611. If you're on the phone, you can text it and we'll get to your questions. Or also, if you do want a yard sign, you can also get in touch with us, and Shelly, who's up in Northeast Nebraska, can meet up with you and potentially drop that off or meet you up at a coffee shop to hand off a yard sign or a barn sign.
Yes, we have yard signs that you put in the ground, the no trespassing signs that you can put on your fence line. And then we have the big barn signs too that are like 5 foot long. So if you want some of those to put on your land, we have those as well. Somebody had typed into the chat that Navigator did call and asked for a survey. And when they said no, they just hung up on them, which yes, these pipeline companies can be very rude if you're not abiding by the way that they want you to act. And that Summit has kind of, and this is what we're beginning to hear in Nebraska, Navigator is kind of ramping up their pressure, and Summit, for folks that have said no, have tried to maybe go to your neighbor or, you know, folks down the road. So that's something that we really encourage you to talk to your neighbors about. If you go to nebraskaeasement.org, we have a whole packet of information that we give to landowners in in-person meetings, including information you can give to your commissioners on a sample ordinance that they could pass to protect you and to protect them and to protect the county's water supplies. So you could send that information to your neighbors. You could either print it off or email it to them, because they may not have been on the original quote unquote route, but these pipeline companies put landowners in 3 categories. They put them in the category of they've signed, they're easy to work with, and essentially check, they've signed the contract. They put you in the other category is, well, maybe it's going to take some negotiation, some higher pressure, and maybe more money. Or they put you in the category of you're difficult to work with, you're a troublemaker, and, you know, let's try to maybe send in a different land agent, or let's try to go around them. So I'm assuming a lot of people on this call are in the 3rd category. And that's why it's important to really rally your neighbors, because they may just try to go to them, but then you would still be at risk if an explosion happened. Okay, so one of the folks asked Brian about what they can do with county commissioners. Maybe you want to give a few words, and then I certainly can give some information as well. For example, should they try to get on the agenda, because Summit and Navigator have been doing that in most, if not all, of the counties?
Yep, great question. So, I mean, ultimately, the counties are very important and very powerful. And as a landowner, you might be thinking, well, you know, where do I go for help? There is no state agency that helps you. There is no group or organization other than the people you're looking at right here in our respective teams that are out there doing this. And so we will help you through the county commissioner process, sample ordinances, you know, sample resolutions, or help organizing. So it's not just one person going in there and then the pipeline company shows up and just berates you and tells you how stupid you are, which is what they're doing all over Iowa and South Dakota right now. So you don't want to do that alone. We'll help you to do that. Now, the face of the landowners carrying that torch and coming in with, here's an ordinance. I want my county to be protected. You county commissioners owe a duty to me as a landowner, taxpayer, resident of this county, and all these people sitting behind me, which Jane and Mark will help get there. So a show of force and support for you to pass reasonable, intelligent ordinances, setbacks to protect us. And so that is a way that you can directly impact the routing, the potential routing. Imagine if your county had a setback that no hazardous pipeline could be located within 1,500 feet, half mile, 1 mile of any inhabited residence, or 2 miles of any school, nursing home, hospital, right? Imagine that. You would be taking the power into your own hands, going around the legislature and all the lobbyists and all the backroom deals, and protecting yourselves, your county, and your neighbors by intelligent, reasonable setbacks. That won't happen unless the landowners push it. I can walk in there and tell them what to do. No, they need to see the faces of people that they see every day at the cafe, at the gas station, around town, at the high school football games, etc. And so this is only as successful as you are willing to get out there and do it. We have the tools, the direction can help you get there, but you have to take up that torch and do it. And so we encourage you to get on the agendas, to speak out about your concerns, to come with the solution, or at least a partial solution to the problem that is foisted upon you that you don't even want, by putting forth ordinances, model ordinances that we will help put together to protect you. And so absolutely, the county, organizing at the county is huge. What's happening in South Dakota and Iowa right now is the landowners get on the agenda. someone from Navigator Summit comes in, badmouths them, says, we'll sue this county, blah, threatens, all the while claiming that we just want to be your neighbor and be your friend and we're so swell. They're just real jerks. And so that's why you need to have yourself and a bunch of your neighbors and friends, and we can help get those people there. So the counties are key. Influencing your county commissioners is key.
And, as Brian said, you don't have to walk in empty-handed. You can walk in with a sample county ordinance that a pipeline expert, Paul Blackburn, who works with BOLD, created. He looked at all of the Nebraska state statutes to make sure that it wouldn't be preempted by anything. So a county commissioner can't say, well, we can't pass this because the state law says we can't. So it's been through that vetting. And it's really just good protections that any county should already have in place. But because we're not an oil state, we don't have lots of pipelines crisscrossing our state carrying oil. We have literally one, the Keystone XL pipeline, and a Platte pipeline that's on the southern part of the pipeline. So there's 2 oil pipelines and then a couple fracked gas feeder lines, but there's not these major pipelines like Texas has, for example. So lots of counties in Texas or Oklahoma have county level ordinances around pipelines. So on this perspective, we want to make it clear, we don't think county commissioners are bad because they don't have these pipeline regulations in place. It's because they've never really had to deal with this. And they certainly haven't had to deal with carbon pipelines. In Holt County, they have a very good set of ordinances that they have been moving through their process for oil pipelines, because a year ago, none of us in Nebraska even thought that there was a thing called carbon pipelines. And so Holt County is now amending those ordinances to add in carbon as well as a potentially issue now that is going to face their county. So if you don't want to present this information alone, myself, Tom, or Shelley can certainly go with you. Paul Blackburn is also willing to come to your county or even present over Zoom. So that's all stuff that we can do as a resource for you. And Mark put in the chat recent information that we've posted about this. It's also on nebraskaeasement.org. And with that, I think I'm just double checking. We have hit the questions. Mark, was there any other questions that you had via text?
I did not get one of those. I was also going to put in the chat a link to the recent video webinar that we put on. Actually was directed towards county board members. And it talks about exactly what steps county board members, supervisors in other states can take, and talks about the safety issues and answers a lot of questions. And we actually had 2 of the county board members, one from Iowa and one from South Dakota, on the panel who took action themselves to work on this. So if there's any folks that are looking at this and say, well, who's doing this, you can point them to this and say, well, this is the actions I've taken in Iowa and South Dakota. So I'll put this in the chat here.
Perfect. And then lastly, as we go, I'll just say a couple last things, and then Brian, I'll turn it to you to close out as well. These pipeline companies are going to say anything and everything to get you to sign a contract, and they're going to tell the press and your county commissioners and our state senators anything and everything to try to prove to them that this project is supported by farmers, ranchers, and landowners. The reality is very few people have signed contracts with these pipeline companies. A reporter is doing a larger story about the carbon pipelines, and the research that he's done, about only 25 miles have been secured by either pipeline company with permanent easements. Shelley, an organizer with the Nebraska Easement Action Team that many of you know, has started to look at the deeds of register and has only found essentially a couple handful of people that have signed, versus you're talking about over 500, maybe potentially 600 landowners in our state that could be impacted by these 2 particular pipelines. And so they are nowhere near going to build this pipeline next summer, which is what they're telling people, or they're going to the press saying, we have 70% of the survey secured. They use numbers like that, because it may be 70% of the easement secured for that quarter's goal. It's not 70% of the easement secured for the entire pipeline route. So be very careful when you're reading these articles with what they're saying, because we always remind landowners that these pipeline companies may never lie, but they never tell you the truth. So be very careful about what they're saying. Brian, I'll let you close out.
Yeah, and just picking up on that, so Summit, approximately 315 miles through Nebraska, and Navigator, 157 minimum. So you've got a lot of people in the exact same position that are emailing us, calling us, we're talking to. We're trying to get all of you together under one big umbrella here so that we can fight for the best protections possible. The best thing you can do now is continue to not sign an easement. Share something you learned here tonight with your neighbors and friends so they don't sign an easement, as there is no urgency. There's no approvals in any state. And remember, these are all connected. It's not just within Nebraska. So they have to get state approvals all over the place before any of this is really going to be ultimately a go. And we have lots of different options going in the other states as well. Any one major victory in one of those other states could kill the entire project. So you've got to share the information. You've got to tell more people about this. You'll get a follow-up email likely if we have your email, where you can even share this Zoom. Feel free to have them watch it to get educated, look at the other resources. But at the end of the day, if you're not willing to stand up and protect your land, your legacy, your future, no one else is going to do it. We have the resources, the expertise, and the team here to help. And we want you all to come and stand shoulder to shoulder with us and do the very best we can to protect you and your families in the future.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you everybody for spending an hour with us tonight. And we look forward to seeing you at one of the in-person meetings as well. And we will see you on the next webinar. Thanks, everybody.